Our journey of new beginnings will always honor and rejoice the past. This is Every Widow Thing. This is Lacey with Every Widow Thing, and we're here today with Whitney, Holly, and Keira. And we have a special guest, Cheryl Martin. Welcome, Cheryl.
Welcome, Cheryl.
Hi. Glad to be here.
We are very glad to have you. And I want to tell you in full disclosure, Cheryl Martin was a grief therapist lastly, but she was also my grief therapist when Oliver died that first year before she retired. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background, and then we're just going to dive in with some questions. Hope you're ready, Cheryl.
I'm ready.
Cheryl is a retired licensed clinical social worker and most recently a grief therapist at My Healing Place, which is now called the Austin Center for Grief and Loss here in Austin, Texas. She earned her Master of Science in Social Work with a focus on children and families from the University of Texas in Austin. She spent her entire professional career working in social services. Prior to graduate school, she worked as a caseworker in aid to families with dependent children and food stamps, which is now called SNAP. Postgraduate school, she worked in a psychiatric hospital with adolescents, a residential treatment center for latency-aged children who had been removed from their families due to abuse and neglect. And finally, as a grief counselor for children and adults, which is how I know her. She has experience with addiction and the devastation the disease causes an addict, as well as for an addict's family and friends. She's lived in Central Texas for 41 years, and sadly, she too is a widow. Her husband, Bruce, of 52 years, died in 2023, so she's a fairly recent widow and can probably really help us understand grief in a personal way as well. She has a daughter, a son-in-law, and 6-year-old granddaughter, Luna, who's so precious, and they are the lights of her life. So,
welcome, Cheryl. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We're excited. Lacey has spoken so highly of you the whole time we've known her.
Yeah, just so glad you're here today, and hopefully you can shed some light on not necessarily my crazy stuff.
Divulge all of Lacey's secrets.
How much time do we have?
You had a really good question when we were kind of discussing having you on the show. You came up with a really good question.
Well, I was just... I find it so interesting because for so long you were giving therapy to people with loss, and now you are a person that has suffered that same loss. So I was just curious, what have you noticed in your life as a widow that you didn't realize as the therapist?
Okay, and it's a really good question. Prior to being a widow, and even when I was working as a grief therapist, I've had some pretty significant grief losses and things in my life. So I was not unfamiliar with grief. Since I've been a widow, I wouldn't say it's changed a lot in terms of what I would be doing with my clients or what I feel about grief. However, now that I am a widow, I obviously have more empathy in a different way for people who've lost their spouses and our partners. And so I would have some more insight into certain issues or circumstances that they would bring up and maybe have a different way to talk with them about it or deal with them. And I'm thinking in particular of the second year grief.
Yes.
It is just not talked about enough. And my clients, I had clients, not just widows, but other clients as well, who talked about being shocked and distressed about the second year coming and feeling worse than the first year. Mm-hmm. And I didn't disbelieve them for a moment. I mean, I listened to them. I heard what they said. They couldn't describe it very well. I just tried to be there for them. And to be honest, I didn't quite understand it either. And now I have lived into the second year. And I get it. I get it in the way when you walk in somebody else's shoes. It's a thing. It's a real thing. And now I have an understanding of why I think it happens. So that would be a difference.
Well, I would love to hear your answer. Why we've talked about that a lot with the second year being so much more difficult. And we know what we've said, but I'd be so curious to hear your insight on that now.
Well, I have a metaphor for that.
We love metaphor.
It's not scientific, but I'm a runner, so my metaphor comes from running a lot. But in the first year, of course, what I know and believe is, for one thing, we're in a lot of shock. We're not taking in everything. There's all of the financials, all the business, all the things that you're trying to take care of in the beginning that you're just running on that. You're not even thinking, feeling that much. And then, and that takes a while to dissipate, it just comes to you a little bit in layers of how you're feeling. And so some of it's about not totally taking it all in. And here's what I will say, this is my metaphor as a runner. I feel like the first year is like a relay, like a sprint. It's like the first part in the leg of the relay. We're doing everything I just said, and then we're going through the anniversaries, the holidays, the birthdays, all of these things that just keep coming up one after the other. And finally, the big ending at the year end, the big anniversary of the first year. And the focus is, oh, I got it through that. That's the leg. That was that relay. I did it. Oh, now I've got to go to the next relay. Okay, but I can do that. I can get there. And I keep going because I know at the end, there's that end of the first year. Mm-hmm. It's going to feel like some completion that I have done this. And then I got to that end of the year and the end of the relays, and there was somebody standing there saying, "Why are you stopping? The marathon starts now." And for me, it's the reality has set in. It's not over. I will do this again and again and again. And taking in the magnitude of the loss is what I think happens in the second year. And
not having the support anymore. Like, people have now moved on and they think that you have somehow moved on. So you don't have the support. You're no longer in shock. So you're fully in your new normal, and it fucking sucks.
It does.
And then you don't have anyone recognizing that anymore, which can be really isolating. Absolutely.
And that is a lot of times what brought people to therapy, because they didn't have that anymore. They did not have the people. That was another surprise for many, many people, was the people they thought would be there just consistently, supporting them forever, are not there.
It's weird. We just posted something the other day to this, and a lot of people commented that after 10, 7, 13 years, I finally started saying this post that I had seen, that they said, I still love him and he's still dead. Mm-hmm. Right. Because people think 13 years later, why are you still grieving? Right. Well, it doesn't mean that I don't have good days or weeks or months or years even. And it doesn't mean that there aren't things to look forward to, but you're still carrying and living with it. And so there, to your point, the marathon begins.
Right.
And it's a 13-year marathon, 10, 7, and in your case, the second year. Right. So I think I wanted people to see that post and to hear this from you, is that it's something we live with, and we have to educate people that you're not over it. You never will be over it.
Absolutely. And for a while, I kept thinking, there's no talk about the second year. It comes as such a shock. And I was talking to a friend of mine, like, maybe we need to write a book about this.
I was just thinking that for you. Cheryl.
Well, wait. We said that you had
something coming in.
She had some things she wanted to do in her next phase of her life. Well, there you go.
Well, I didn't finish my statement. And then we said, but who wants to hear that in the first year? That it's just going to get worse the second year. So maybe nobody's going to read that.
Trying to protect people. It's certainly in the beginning.
So true.
The early months and that first year, you're trying to soften the blow of, hey, look, we're years out, we're doing fine, but you don't want to be like,
we decided already.
Get ready, buckle up.
But for people, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I tell people when they ask for advice, I'm like, check in on them 2 years in, 3 years in. I got at Toby's memorial, people wrote little cards, little postcards were handed out. And someone sent me a postcard, a note about Toby, a memory about Toby. 5 years later.
I love that.
Nice. And it meant so much to me.
That's so kind of that person. Really,
because people don't say their name anymore. And because we don't talk so much about grief, they don't want to say his name because they think it's going to, I forgot that he died. They think it's going to make you feel sad. Wait a minute, my husband said? What are you talking about? So nobody says anything. And that, again, makes it so hard for you because, like Lacey said, I think about my husband at least once a day. And that's also because I talk to him and really feel like he's still with us, helping me, for other people to say his name and give me an opportunity to to talk about him is such a gift, but nobody feels like they can do
I think
that.
it's a misconception that they think it's going to make you upset if they bring him up. But to Holly's point, it can bring a little bit of joy to your day.
It can.
To realize, oh, maybe somebody else was thinking about him and remembering him and sharing that with me.
I love hearing stories. And last Toby's group of friends, so Sunday will be 8 years since his death. And I was just kind of reminiscing about it, even though I can't help but not remember the date because it was very tragic. And last year, I just remember his group of friends sent me, they were all had a group text that day. And they sent me some pictures later in the evening. And I was like, well, why didn't you put me on the text? I was like, next time y'all do that, add me to the text. So they were sharing all these stories about him. And
I had a similar thing where Frank played, we called it old man soccer. It was 40 and over soccer. And every year on the anniversary of his death, the soccer team would get together and have a beer over at Deep Eddy, which is what they used to do after soccer games. And I would get these texts we had our yearly beer, we talked about him, and it's sort of like you. I was like, hey, I want to come. I want to come to the soccer beer,
When'd you go? I mean, have you?
I haven't been invited yet. And maybe, it's 10 years now. Maybe they're not doing it. Maybe COVID put a hiccup in there.
Well, maybe you should.
But maybe that was their space to just swap soccer stories. I don't know. I mean.
But still, if you just showed up 30 minutes towards the end.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, let me ask a question, Cheryl. Having been a therapist, how did that help you at all when you went through the loss of your husband at all? I know you've had your own grief journey before the loss of Bruce, but did it help you at all? Because you had the tools in your toolbox, because you used to tell me to have my tools ready when I had to engage with family. And because Holly and I often say that certain people in our lives we've had to engage with, that we've had to kind of put boundaries around them. Did it help you to have that in your arsenal?
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, just having the training that I had, the learning that I had about grief, the people that I had worked with, the things that I'd seen people go through and with them, it didn't make it easier. In fact, it's been horrendous, as you all know. I mean, the other griefs in my life, one of them I thought nothing could be worse until my husband died. And then I couldn't figure out why this was so much worse than the other, which had to do with my child, he was there with me. When
You
I
lost
did the
your
other
person.
grieving. I lost him. There was at the end, I would tell people at the end of the day, literally and figuratively, I'm alone in this grief. But no doubt that everything that I'd learned, that being the therapist helped me know, what I was going through. Even though it was horrible, I still knew. It wasn't shocking to me.
What tool would you say, there's lots of tools in the toolbox, but what tool, knowing now, having gone through this type of grief, would you say has helped you the most, or something that we can give? And if you need to think about it, we can come back to it. But just a tool for the widows listening, or the widowers.
Wow, to think of what would be the most is really hard. But one thing that comes to my mind, and it kind of goes back to what y'all were just talking about coming to the second year, and people have expected you to be moving on, or they're afraid to bring things up. They don't want you to feel sad again, even though that's not what happens. Or if you do, you've got the support, right? Is that it's so important to seek and continue to find the people in your lives who are there, the ones that you feel safe enough to say. And it's hard when, I know for me personally, in grief, to reach out and say, I need you, but it's one of those imperative things to help. So that would be a tool, because the support is so important. And if it can be with other widows, like y'all have been able to do, it's fantastic. But one of the first things I would say, and I think people might think it's interesting that I'm going to call this a tool, but I just have allowed all of my grief emotions to have their say. Every one of them, the anger, the sadness, the loneliness, the longing, the uncertainties, the fears, that they have to have their say. And when I say that, I mean, I've yelled at my husband for leaving, out of anger. I have,
I literally did that yesterday.
did you?
Yes, something was going on with my child, and I screamed at Frank.
He can't scream back, so that makes it easy. Did you actually go to his ashes and scream, or did you just scream into the air?
I was driving around and there was a sunset, and sometimes I'll look at the sunset and think of him. And I think it's a great tool, even as far out as I am. I love that you're bringing this up. I'm trying to feel more things, even these many years later. I'm trying to allow myself, especially the anger and the disappointment.
Right.
I'm trying to, instead of I was kind of bootstrapping it for a long time for my kids. And I'm feeling like it's healthier now to kind of dig into some of that, honestly.
Right.
Well, that can also make you feel shut down too about it. The longer it goes on, I remember Holly saying that at the beginning she didn't think about what other people said about anything. She was just like doing her thing and just getting through the day, as she always says. That's her quote. But it is a good one, and as time goes on, people don't want you to keep doing that. So I feel like I've internalized it, and thank God I have them to tell, like, even now, 13 years later, I'm noticing things that happen with Ryder or whatever family member or friend it bubbles up things that he's not here. Your person, Bruce, is not here to talk to.
Right.
So,
Right.
And I love that you always address the anger part. God knows I came to you enough times with the rage is so acute when your person who was a good guy is gone and you see all of these horrible human beings living in the world that you think, why are they here? And why is this amazing soul not here? And not because of me, just in the world.
Well, it's the unfairness, right? It all feels so unfair. Nobody asked for it. Nobody wanted it. And yet we're having to live with it. So yes, for me, the way that I would allow the other feelings would be, the crying, just crying it out, just being okay with the crying and the sadness, but also, other ways, finding the people that you can express these things with, not just yelling to the air, at God or your husband, and or the circumstance, whatever the circumstance might have been. And
well, does a therapist get a therapist?
I did. I wanted to say that.
Yeah.
I actually, this has come later, it's recent, but one of the things I did earlier on, after about 4 or 5 months, was I joined a group, support group for grief through Hospice Austin. I can say that. And I did that early on because that was probably the other thing from coming from being a therapist is I know how helpful that could be. Or I assumed it was. And clients tell me it was.
Smartest widow out there. Seriously, she has every qualified widow ever.
Well, how did you find that? Like, that was a question that I think Whitney came up with when we were talking, is that what do you look for when you're looking for a therapist? Because a lot of people aren't having good luck out there finding somebody.
Well, that's a little bit different than, okay, let me start with the group, because that was a group therapy. And my husband was in home hospice for 3 weeks. And so I knew of their programs that they had, and they had told me they had group or individual. And so I didn't really have to look far for that. I just knew that I needed something. I believed that I needed the shared experience with others. And even so, again, you're asking a really good question, because I had also facilitated grief support groups. So I was kind of snobby about how these people might run this group. And
Did you try to take over?
only in my mind.
Okay. Secretly, you're running it in the back of your mind. Yeah. So either being a good girl.
That's funny, because she is, I bet that happened.
Well, and for a couple of sessions, it was an 8-week group, I really had some struggles. But I decided not to quit right away. That's part of it. I'll just give it a little bit more time. And we discovered that when I worked at my healing place, which is now Austin Center for Grief and Loss, where some people would come into a group and it was just not for them. Some people, it was too soon. They needed more just individuals to have all the time for themselves.
When did you start the group? Like, how long had it been for you?
I was into about into the fifth month, started into the sixth. And they had actually said, they don't really accept until you've been grieving about the fourth month. And we used to say that at my healing place too. Don't come into a group just right away. It really is a lot. But it ended up being a really great time for me. It ended up being all widows. And some people left, and there ended up a core of 4 of us. And we still meet up every other, core women.
It's like us.
I have to say, now you have to start a podcast.
Our core women.
What were the age rate? I mean, were y'all all around the same age?
Yes, we were. It's really interesting how it just came together. All had our husbands die within about a 4-month period. It's just, and it was just random. It happened. And so we still meet up every other Monday.
Oh, I love that.
It was great. As far as, so that's part of it. You kind of give it a time if it doesn't feel right. I mean, but that's also personal. How much time do you want to give to something that doesn't feel right? And if it's not right, heavens, you're in grief. Do what you need to do to feel better. It's leave the group and find something else.
Even if you make, I think, one connection, right? I mean, you were fortunate enough to create this group before.
It was
What if you just find one person in that group that you can walk with or have coffee with or vent to each other? I think it's worth it to try. If I had found something like that at the time, which I did not, I would have definitely jumped in. I couldn't find anything that was young enough for me, and people with young kids, and just it didn't quite fit the profile for me until I met these ladies. But I think that's wonderful that you met people that way. And I think I think that's a great way for people to find a support group.
It really is.
If someone was going out there looking for a therapist, when they're going to interview them, but what would you suggest they ask the therapist when they're interviewing them?
Well, before I answer that, I just wanted to say something else about what you were talking about, finding maybe one person. And I'd also like just to point out that sometimes just the group can be very helpful too. I did not think I was going to want or even need to keep meeting up with these women before. I felt like I had, plenty of support, but I didn't want to say no to them. And so I went the first time when we met up, and I've been doing it ever since because it has been really extraordinarily helpful for me. But even just what you could learn from the group. Now, as far as individual, one of the first things I wanted to say about that is if somebody's just starting fresh, definitely you'd want to look for degrees and certifications, right? What the therapist has, and specialties. Their specialty, because there's so many modalities of therapy out there. And it's not to say that someone in grief couldn't be helped by someone who hadn't been trained in grief therapy. I wouldn't recommend it. It's just a different thing. It's, grief is not a mental illness. It's a natural and normal reaction to a loss. And there is a diagnosis for
the unresolved grief thing.
It's not perpetual.
I know
there is a disorder.
Yeah.
And it's mostly for when you're just debilitated for a long, long, long time. But we're not talking about that. We're just talking about the grief that is normal and natural. So once you find somebody with their degrees and maybe their specialty and their trainings, my first response to this is to say, ask them anything that you think is important to you. And a therapist ought to be open and willing for that and give you at least enough answers to what you're asking that you would feel comfortable and feel like you've been heard by them. And if not, that might be your first clue that this isn't where you want to be. After that, again, you might ask about trainings they've had, experiences they had, maybe what brought them to grief themselves, if you're interested in that. But I will say what I think mostly you're going to find about whether it's the fit for you is not something you can describe.
Chemistry.
It's just a feeling you're going to have. And what I think is when you get with someone and you feel that you're comfortable with them, you feel like you're being heard by them. And what I mean by that, they may be responding to you with ways that you get it that they've just heard what you've said, or if not, they're asking you questions to help them understand it better, or they're just saying things that you know that they just got it. That would be one way, I think, that you would feel like you were heard. The other way would be just how comforted you might feel, because what you're needing at this time is...
Lacey's crying.
Now I'm going to.
No, don't make the guests cry. We need to squeeze all the info.
On a scoop. She's just you're so good about not only listening to what the person's saying, but you were always so thorough. You would circle back just like you did with Keira.
Well, I was going to say that you ought to be able to feel like there's some gentle movement through the session too, that you're not just flailing out there and being left to your own devices, that there's some way that you're also being guided through it.
Dump, right?
It can be, but that still the therapist would be able to somehow wrap that up, wrap you in it some way and move you through it.
I think that's a great point. When do you start to take on some of this on your own?
Well, everybody that goes to therapy has their own needs that they need. And, but if somebody needs to keep going, that would be one thing for them. I couldn't speak to that. But in answer to your question, that's what I believe. Yes, that the goal would be that somehow you would be helping guide them through this terrible journey that they're on, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. And so, yes, I think that's the goal.
And I was always seeking the tools. I would sometimes go and they listened, and that was great. And my feelings were validated, and that was great. But then I really was looking for these tools that you were referring to, this toolbox that I could then take home and implement to get myself through to the next session, or, whenever I saw the therapist again, or things happen and it's nighttime and, I didn't have the therapist on speed dial. I didn't feel like I ever found someone that gave me enough tools, that I wasn't really getting a guidebook. I was going in and I was sharing my feelings, and they were very understanding and supportive. But I really like this idea of, because I'm sort of a do it myself. I'm type A. I want to be able to fix it myself. I wanted to be able to fix my situation, my family, my kids, heal everybody. And I had a hard time finding a therapist that really had a comprehensive toolbox, I guess.
Well, I think we started with the toolbox, and I don't think that I got past just being out for the emotion part, which has brought all this other wonderful conversation up. And when I say these things, you're probably going to go, well, yeah, I know that. Well, I know that. But some of it just takes dedication, right? And the repeat. But what I started with was just being able to give voice to all these awful, awful feelings and inside. But
Would you write? Would you journal, or would you just let it? You would just sit in it. How did you personally do that?
both. I write. I particularly like poetry. And yes, so I write. I don't just journal like people talk, even though through my grief, I have done a bit of that with, it's usually directed to my husband, and whatever has happened and whatever is going on. And so, yes, that is absolutely one. I've done both of those things. I have just been in the pits, in the deep, dark pit of despair, no doubt, and hating it, but also allowing myself to be there, but never not looking for that little light that's way up there, whether it's my family, my friends that are there, the sunshine that's come out, those sorts of things. And there's usually people there that are about ready to hand down a ladder to me, when I'm ready to come up. So that, yes, the writing, reading books on grief. I mean, I have been given a lot of permission to be in grief just by some of the books. I've had two things that have been amazing for me since I've become a widow that I didn't have before, even that I gave me a lot of permission. There was some exercises.
Will you share those books?
Absolutely.
So that's a good idea.
Absolutely. Right this moment. I was going to say, I wrote it down on a different paper and I didn't burn that paper.
We can back to the books. Yeah.
Well, you could share them with us and we can post it on our social media.
So the books and the reading. And again, I mentioned I'm a runner. That's one of my tools. I have not quit running. I have not quit.
We were running, but we were running to Mexico and to Hawaii.
I've had a friend do that and I felt in the beginning like she was doing so wonderful. And I was like, and then she comes back from these trips to Europe and everything. And then suddenly that's where she is, you know. And she said, while I was gone, there was a bubble for me. And for some people, that's important. I mean, everybody has their own way. I guess that's important to know.
Did you ever escape?
I didn't, because I will tell you, I didn't want to leave the home. I didn't want to leave Bruce, my husband. His presence is so unbelievably strong there. And it's not quite as strong, but it's still there. I found peace there. In the midst of all the agony, I felt peace there. I did not feel like I wanted to go anywhere. I really felt held there. But I'm sure I had my ways of escape. Running's probably somewhat of escape. You know, I get out there.
Exercise as a coping.
Yeah, everybody but Whitney.
I was about to say,
But you're into it now, though, and so that's good.
Yeah, kind of. What's interesting, I think we escaped also because we had young children and I wanted to take them and do fun things. So that was part of it, although now I'm escaping by myself.
I did both. I took my kids on a lot of fun trips, and then I also just needed breaks for myself. But I was avoiding. I wasn't sitting in it like you have been. I was avoiding for a long time.
Well, you know, I had the luxury, that's for y'all out there, that's, you know, and I'm doing air quotes, because I did not have a young child or children at home. It's a whole different level of what you're dealing with. And you call it escape. You're taking care of your children and trying to do what you think is going to also make them get through this, right? You're their person to help them get through it. And I don't even know if escape is a really, you know, accurate word for that. I mean, in your mind, it may feel like that, but it seems
self-care. That would probably make me feel less shameful.
She also didn't have the tools. No therapist gave her tools to be able to deal with the grief. Like, because there are no rules for this. We didn't get a manual that told us what to do.
Absolutely.
You helped me by giving me those tools so that I could, didn't mean I didn't escape ever, but it made it less where I needed to do that because of the things that and one of the things you said to do is you gave me a script one day. You said, you're going to go home and you're going to take a nap. And I was like, I can do that? Like, because we all had little kids and it sounded so silly. Now I kind of laugh about it, but it was true. I remember permission to go home and take I was exhausted. And so that was even a good tool for the toolbox.
Absolutely.
Take it out.
Absolutely. Self-care. We talk about self-care, but self-care is really individual. It's like there's some things that are universal. Being sure that you're keeping up with your physical body, right? What you're eating, getting some rest, and those sorts of things. The exercise if possible, meditation if possible. But mostly it's about what makes you feel more peaceful, what gives you some rest. And if going with your children was what they did that for you, or a nap in the afternoon, some things we don't give ourselves permission for, and somebody else
Everyone's
needs
picturing
to
the
do
spa
it.
day, but yeah, for me, self-care just has meant a million different things since our car accident, and just trying to even have like a moment by myself before the school day ended for the kids, you know, where I would just sort of center myself before I had to pick them up from school and start all the activities and everything kind of started rolling again. And so, yeah, even something as small as that, just
Right.
taking a beat for yourself.
That's a tool. You might not have realized it, but you had a tool.
I was picturing that multi-tool that you send your kid off to college with. It has a little bit of everything.
Well, I have a few more on my list, but you're right, couldn't do it on kids.
But that was my multi-tool. It wasn't so great.
It's what you could do then at the time,
You
right?
had another tool too, and we had a guest on our show that was an EMDR specialist, and you had recommended that to me. Something happened strange in there too in that one session, and I wanted you to address that as well, because I don't know if you guys, this is something I don't think any of us have talked about, or if any of our audience members experienced it. I don't know if you remember, but when I was doing a session with you, I had a dissociation.
Disassociation.
And I said, I remember telling you, I said, your head's really big and your body was really small, and you were having me walk through what happened that day. And you waited quite a while to ask me those questions because the relationship had to be, kind of secure, and I felt safe. But I remember that happening, and it's the weirdest. It was the best feeling, and I was floating.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you started asking me what happened that day, I went out and I was up in the air, and your body looks weird. So what is that?
What was happening?
And how did you get me to, you can tell them how you got me to come out of that spiral.
Remember. Oh, I did? You can cut that out. She just reminded me what I did. I'm like, what did I do? Well, I know what I would probably do now, but that was 13 years ago. Well, yeah, she had an out-of-body experience because this was too painful. She did not want to be there.
The mind is an amazing thing. It's protecting you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Her mind was not prepared to go back to that awful, traumatic situation. She was traumatized in that situation. And so the body, she was being protected from that experience again. And so she was going off and it felt pretty good, but she didn't need to be out there. It's really important for her to be grounded. See, I mean, that's really literally and figuratively grounded, because she was dissociating, and we needed it for you to come back and be in the moment and right there. It was too much. And one way to do that is to have people be sure they can feel their feet on the floor, get their hands, feel in the moment, to feel something solid. And I had her hold a ball, to get a ball and to be feeling that ball and just it's really about getting back in the moment, not being out there, not being back in the experience with Oliver, but to be in the moment and to breathe and to breathe and to breathe. And so because she was traumatized then, just regular talk therapy doesn't always work with that. There's certain ways that the circuits in the brain need to be rewired. And that was the EMDR.
Did y'all have that response at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've been diagnosed with PTSD also, and I also had the dissociating when I did the EMTT, Dr. Vasquez, where I think I talked about this in an earlier episode, similar to EMDR, but I was looking at a color rainbow. And when I would start to talk about the car accident, he specifically specialized in helping people that were in car accidents. And when I would talk about that moment, the whole rainbow went black. And he was really sweet, because I would start panicking. I'm like, I can't see the orange anymore. And because I wanted to do it right to be healed. And he says, as soon as it turns black, look at my shirt. And he had like a plaid shirt on, and he would make me look at him. Like, just look at his shirt and look at the pattern and be like, what pattern do you see here? And then I would restart all over again until I could hold the color while talking about the car accident. It was really fascinating, actually. And it really worked. It really helped me. Ultimately, I was able to hold on to the rainbow, get through the story after like 50 times or something without that blackness coming in. A similar grounding.
Right. Did you guys do anything like that?
No, but I do have a question about reliving that car accident or the death, whatever the situation, because Zach's therapist did make him relive the car accident. He was in the accident. I was not. And I was telling another therapist friend that his therapist was having him relive it. And they were like shocked at that. I mean, why do you want to relive it?
Good
I mean,
question.
obviously, I've gone over it in my head, but I wasn't in the accident. And I don't know if you have an answer to that.
I don't exactly, though. I don't know that I would, in my work and just the grief therapy that I was doing, that I would think someone necessarily had to relive it by talking about it. Some people have a strong need to talk about it, to share it.
Well, and it's
to
kind of
express
disturbing to me that my 11-year-old, I'm like, of course I'm criticizing myself for letting him go to this therapist. And I mean, I never talked to him about it because
The therapist should have had you there at least.
He did.
Seems like.
I mean, and I knew, but this was like, I'm like thinking, oh, okay, this is what you do.
Right.
Because I had no experience.
That was your son? You said Zach was your son or is your son? So what was his experience from that? Do you know?
I don't really know. I think he was so young and he was going through the process because I was like, okay, we're going to therapy. And he just did it. And he never, I would ask him, do you feel better? Do you want to go back? And he would go back until one day he was like, I don't want to go anymore. And I was like, okay, if you don't feel like you need to go. But I haven't talked to him about it in a really long time.
The EMDR specialist mentioned the day that we had her, she said there that with particularly kids, like Zach was injured as well. So it was doubly traumatic for him. She said that there's some people you don't keep pushing. Like there's a point which that you've gone too far and then you have to pull back because it can re-traumatize somebody. Like I never understood why someone needed to relive it. I don't know.
Well, like Keira, like why did you choose that therapy, and did it help you?
So there were a few reasons I ended up with Dr. Vasquez. One was I was going to try EMDR that Lacey had suggested, but my therapist either wasn't doing it anymore or she didn't have someone that was doing EMDR, but she had gone to a lecture of Dr. Vasquez and said, oh, I think this person might help you. Why don't you try this? I think for me, it was the PTSD. I think for me, it was reliving some of the moments in the car accident, reliving, when the EMT stood outside the open window and I'm trapped in the car and they called in Frank's death. So that's like how I found out he was dead while I'm still trapped in the car after I'd caught on fire. So there were just things that were sticking with me. I mean, it was a lot to take in. And this was a few years after, because of my circumstance, everything was pushed out because I was in and out of surgery for 2 years. Then I had a major relapse, had sepsis, almost died again. And I just went through so many physical things that were traumatic that all of the grief part got pushed out. But my therapist at one point thought that this PTSD from the accident, was interfering with kind of my day-to-day. And it was causing a lot of residual trauma for me. And so that's why I went. But I think, he also explained to me, this could happen. This therapy is good for anything, not just a massive car accident, but even like an unsettling phone call, like when you get the call that something's happened, or, the policeman shows up at the door, or whatever it is. Even if you weren't physically in the car like I was when Frank died, just these little things that you're replaying over and over, and your nervous system is reliving it and creating more trauma and stress in the body.
I think it just depends on how your body is reacting. Like, I would get anxious when I would hear an ambulance, but it wasn't to the point where I had to pull over and had a panic attack. So I just kind of worked through it myself. But if it had been a debilitating reaction, then that's when you go and get it taken care of, is kind of how I thought of it.
The hard thing for me too is whenever I would meet someone new, and this was whether it was a doctor's appointment or like some parents at school or with the sports, the activities. So I'm meeting new people all the time that don't know my story. You tell them what happened. I would try to craft it in a very low key way because I'm kind of low key. I'm not really like Whitney, like my husband's dead. I'd be like, well, she says she has widow Tourette's. My family's been through some things lately. So the kids are X, Y, and Z, or I'm a little overloaded right now. I would just be like real sly about it. And then, even if I just went in for like a mammogram and I have this scar down the middle of my body, oh, what happened here? And then I would say, oh, I was in a car accident. And then they would say, did anyone die?
That is horrible.
I just got tired of getting triggered all the time, right?
Yeah.
And then they want to know all the gory details. And it was funny because doing the podcast and telling my story was kind of liberating in that I'm like, here's what happened, folks. For all you out there wondering, this is the horrible shit show that happened to me. And my child was also in the car as well. And so anyway, that was part of it too. I was tired of having to just be re-triggered and re-traumatized in everyday interactions.
I would never say that to somebody. That's the craziest thing.
And especially
human curiosity. I swear to God.
But seeing
everybody wanted to know.
Dramatic scar down someone's body, you know just by looking at it that was a horrifying, traumatic event. How dare you?
And you're getting a mammogram.
You're medical people.
Like, how weird is that you're already in a vulnerable state?
What did you say? Did you ever say to somebody, I really don't want to talk about that? Or would you try to play it off like, oh, no big
She
deal?
probably told them, because you're one of those
I'm a
people
people pleaser, so I was raised to kind of like be polite and get through it. I did have a general practitioner that I went to see that was recommended to me because I had so many health things going on. And she was supposed to be amazing. And I'm not faulting her, but when I went in for my first visit, I was just explaining everything that had happened. She started sobbing in the appointment. And I switched doctors. I was like, I need somebody who's going to be like, all right, Keira, I've got you. Like, we're going to fix this. We're going to take care of you. You're going to be okay. Yes, you've lost your spleen. Yes, you had a head injury. Yes, your liver's destroyed and you broke every bone in your body. But I'm going to give you some supplements and you're going to feel great.
Right. It's all about the supplement.
I just didn't need the doctor breaking down. I mean, that was traumatizing too.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in because there's just 2 points that I think are really important right here. And one of them, you've both said, when you go for this extra help, it's because your life is being so impacted, that it's hard to move forward and to get on. And that's when you do look for, what else do I need here? And that's really important. The other thing that you just said about the doctor is really important too, which goes back to the question about finding a therapist. It is someone you will feel like whoever you are seeing is someone who can take your grief and hold it. And by that, I mean not fall apart, not be terrified of your own grief, that they can be with you in it. And that, inside we can feel a lot, but we are not the ones that are there to then be helped. So that's another thing to look for when you're telling it, is that person being able to take whatever I'm giving them and hold it for me and help me sort through it and get through it without falling apart themselves or being getting too wrapped up in it with their own emotions.
Right.
So that's
a really important point.
So how does someone like Holly and Keira too, they both had kids that were in the car accident. Like, how do you know what help to give them?
I think a lot depends on what you're seeing with your children, right? I mean, y'all know when your kids are really basically, you did this with Ryder. You tried a group and he just didn't feel like he needed it. I think some of the cues come from your children and keeping the communication open with them. I do know this was because I know Lacey from then, and I know that she was very, very good about keeping the communication open with Ryder. There's a balance, right? There's a balance in protecting them, but also not shoving it away.
Actually, a lot of trial and error because I had 3 kids, all different ages, in and out of all kinds of therapy. And I agree with you. You've got to take the cues from your kid. I feel like with Holly, the minute your son says, I don't want to go back, that was for me, that was it. Okay, we're going to take a break. And then
because if they don't want it, they're not open to any help that they may be getting. It just doesn't work.
Well, it's the same for us, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we get to a point sometimes it's like, well, I'm done with this therapy or I don't want it anymore. For whatever reasons, you feel like you've been helped. You don't feel like you've been helped. You need a break. And the kids can be exactly the same way. So I think, really listening.
Yeah, I've told mine, which I probably need to have this conversation again. But when my older one was like, I don't want to do that, I'm like, I'm not going to make you do it. I said, but know that in 5 years, 10 years, you may need to go back. And I told them, I've seen many therapists in the last 8 years at different times. And one served a purpose for earlier on. And the one I saw just like a year ago served a different purpose.
That's right.
Never know.
That's good advice.
We're running out of time, and I want to kind of get back to your story, Cheryl. We didn't really get any background about you and Bruce and what you had to deal with prior to his death. It wasn't a sudden death. There's grief in caretaking and knowing that there's an end coming versus just it ends. I would love for you to share a little bit of your story with Bruce and then touch on that caretaker grief and how you coped before he died.
I don't mind at all because I love to talk about Bruce, as y'all were all discussing earlier. Well, he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer 8 years before he died. So we lived 8 years with that knowledge and not knowing when it would come. And he was a very strong man, a very determined man. And I will say he did not require tons of caretaking. He was just that independent. We talked, because we knew, we talked many hours about quality versus quantity of life. And he was very clear what was important to him. It was quantity. Of course, he was 65 when he was diagnosed. So he had lived a good time by that time. So what I will say is it gave us a lot of opportunity for prep, but you never can prepare, right? In the end, it's there's no preparing for what it will be like. So as he went through the years, things changed. He'd have to keep changing medicine. There was no cure, but there was a way to manipulate hormones and keep him regulated and to keep the cancer at bay. But it was going to come one day. When it finally came, I will say that it's going to be 2 years on the 3rd of March that we heard he had 6 months. And in reality, it turned out to be 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So there was, while we knew, how can you know, right? And when it came fast. So I did not have a long time of caretaking in the sense we're talking about. Actually, the day that I called the beginning of the last was on a Sunday, and our granddaughter had spent the night with us the night before, and he had been mowing the yard the day before. And he had worked up until that point. He was determined to keep his company going.
He was a tough guy.
He was a very tough guy. I mean, he wasn't feeling well, and things had been happening for a couple of months that was giving me a cue that maybe. But he would then rally, and be back at work. So he would mow the yard. So on that Sunday, I knew something was off more than usual. All of a sudden, he was in so much pain, he couldn't walk across the living room. And I thought he was probably having a heart attack because he kept talking about how much it hurt here. So we called the ambulance. My granddaughter was there, so she was seeing that. But even that wasn't horrible. I mean, he didn't pass out. He wasn't bleeding. There was a lot of things that made it not so traumatizing for her, even though she still talks about that.
How old is she?
She's 6. She was 4 then.
Oh, wow.
And she still talked about ambulance taking him to heaven. That's what she imagined. So even though she did see him before he died once. So anyway, of course, when he got to the hospital, we were told, wasn't his heart, wasn't his lungs. And in fact, it was really the cancer. The cancer, there was just nothing else to do. And they then suggested hospice. So, we had this whole time that we knew it was coming. And then all of a sudden it was here. And there was just no prep for that. And I was terrified, to tell you all the truth. I was terrified. And he was too, because he did not, none of us want this, but he really did not want to be in our home in a hospital bed, unable to take care of himself with me taking care of him. It was the thing we both had hoped he was having a heart attack, to tell you the truth, as awful as that can sound. And it was an awful thought, except that both of us were terrified about this. And I'll also say, you mentioned about, there was just a shroud always, right? We knew it was coming.
But it's not in the moment.
It's not
you're
in the moment.
pushing it back a little bit.
Well, for me, it was very important for him to not go forward, because really I would sometimes think about that. What would this be like? Well, I couldn't really know. But also I knew the time was limited. So I really tried to stay in the day, which, going back to what you said, just get through the day, one day at a time, and to realize in that day that he was still alive and we were still together. And I really worked at that. And that is another tool for grief. It is, if I go out here and think about the rest of my life without Bruce, I can't do it. It's like, how do I do that? How do I live? But I can do a day. I can do an hour, so that's another tool. So that's what I worked really hard on. And so the last 3 weeks of his life, he did get to the point that he did not want to get to, that I was terrified of. Keeping ahead of the pain was the worst part. It was horrendous. I will say that for anybody out there that knows the pain that someone can be in at the end of this, and trying to keep ahead of it and having to keep calling and calling. Can we have more meds? Can we have more meds? I didn't sleep. I lost probably 10 pounds in 3 weeks. I didn't eat. I was constantly having to tend to him every few hours. And people kept wanting to come help. And I knew that he wouldn't want people there. And so I kept saying no, until one day, my friend from Maine, she'd been saying, I'll be there. You just call, you tell me. And I was trying to protect him. And then I just knew, I told her, I need you. And I also knew she was the only person probably he would be allowing that, because they had a special bond themselves together. I mean, he was at her Valentine cards. I mean, they had a very special bond. So she was in Maine. I called her about noon on Monday, and she came in at midnight. And I really don't know how I would have done it that last week without her. I mean, so many things happened. I could go on and on, things that were horrible but made us laugh, and all that horrible stuff, and then we're dying laughing.
There's so much,
it's just
like many moments of humor in those traumatic moments, because it's really the way to cope.
Do exactly, and it's not easy, but it is easy. I mean, y'all get it.
Yeah.
But in fact, one of the hospice nurses, when she was first there, said to me, "There will be blessings in this." I'm like, "Yeah, right, lady. What are you talking about? How's there going to be any blessing?" That to me, yeah. And actually, I will say that in the end, it was a blessing. I was very grateful, and not everybody many people don't get this. Many people, y'all didn't get this, to be there when he took his last breath, and to be there. And it was hard. I was scared. I was exhausted. I was worried. And yet it was one of the greatest gifts that I could have. I mean, this was a man I'd started dating when I was 16. I'd been with him for 56 years. So, as a kid, and then to see him out. And it's one reason why I couldn't leave my home. I was so scared that his death there was going to taint this place, to be honest. That was one reason why I was really scared, because we had moved in the last 10 months because he was trying to downsize and get me into a place that would be, because that's another thing you can do if you know, right? And that was what he wanted to do. It turned out to be such a lovely little place, and we both enjoyed it for a few months there together. I was so afraid his death was going to taint it. The emotions, what my memories would be. It's been nothing like that. I felt like when he died, all he left was love. That's all he left was love. And it's why I could not leave. I really felt like he was there, and you were talking about that in the beginning.
Isn't it interesting how everybody's thing is different? Like, some of us wanted to escape because it's too heavy.
Right.
Whitney's is the only one that's moved. They just moved here and in the house. And so she's moved. This is a house that her husband didn't live in.
Yeah.
None of the other three of us have moved. And so I've thought about Whitney a lot in that situation. Like, would I like it? Would it be nice to have something new that I don't have him there? And then part of me is like, do I want to leave the memories that I have? Because it's 20-something years. I don't know.
I heard something or read something. It's like, don't forget, the soul is portable. And so I really believed, I'm not leaving him. He's going with me. And honestly, the downsizing, the same type of situation, it was too much house. We needed to get closer to my children's after school life, and we were kind of far away from that. So it worked out. But I do want to ask you, because I also believe blessings in the trauma, some of the most horrible things in your life also become the most magical. It's such a strange thing, but if you can hold on to that, that is an amazing gift. Would you like to share something that you get from Bruce? I just always love to hear those stories.
I've had a lot of signs. I'll tell you the most.
Whitney loves the signs.
I love the signs. Well, and I would say there's a lot. Bruce had a thing about crows, and for some reason they were a spiritual animal to him. He was a thing about crows,
Not butterflies.
No crows. He just attached to crows. He loved crows, and he felt like there was something very spiritual. So I always thought it was a spiritual animal. And after he died, I found notes that he had left around, and one of them had to do with me listening for the crows, and that every time I heard a crow, it would be him telling me he loves me. And I have had literally crows. I'll share what y'all don't have enough time.
Around the house.
It's not been at the house.
I have to be the skeptic.
Well, let me tell you. Well, I could tell you several, and you might not be a skeptic anymore. You have to be open, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really his business, but I did the book work and all that for 33 years. He was an electrical contractor. And so one of the things I had to do in the year after he died was close out the company and do all of that, which took time. And I was back at the CPA's office several times. They had been with us for years. It was a small company, that same people there, and they knew us, and they knew when Bruce had cancer and treatments and all that. And so every time I'd go in there, I was very emotional. But when I went in for the final final time. And I knew it was the final time. It was the final closing out. I knew that I was just going to really struggle to hold it together. And I really started to cry. And of course, nobody knows what to do, right? You know, like they're like looking at you like, don't do that, don't do that.
Yeah, they try to
Say,
stop
don't
you.
do that,
Yeah.
don't do that. And so all I wanted to do was to crawl up in the corner into a fetal position and bawl my eyes out because this had been his baby. But I thought, okay, I'm going to walk out of here. I'm going to get in my car and I can cry all I want. So I walk out and I've taken 3 steps and I hear it. The crow, crow. And I look up and there is a crow on an electrical pole.
He's funny.
Oh, he's funny.
So funny.
I have another one. And I'm like, you're here. Thank you. And it's in the middle of town on First Street. So not near my house. But I will tell you another one that is a little bit more indirect. On my birthday last year, I kept wanting to see him. I tell him, you know, I want a sign. I want to see you. Let me know it's my birthday. So my whole birthday goes. There's no sign, no Bruce, no nothing. 9 o'clock that night, I'm not even thinking about it anymore. And I get a text. He used to work for a lot of marinas out at the lake, doing the electrical work or the building, whatever they did. And he was really close to the managers or the owners of a lot of these marinas. So my phone, I had a text and I look at it and there's a text from one of the marina operators that I hadn't heard from over a year before. I hadn't heard from this guy and there's a text from him. I'm like, wow. Okay. And I opened it up and he said, I just hope you're okay. He said, I hope you're okay. I want you to know that today we had an electrical problem on the marina and Bruce would be laughing at me right now so hard because all I've done is walk around talking about how much I miss him. I'm like, oh my gosh. There's my sign. And I'd read him, told him, I said, Roland, you are the conduit. That on my birthday, I wanted something. You had it. You brought it to me. Now, it's how do you get really, you know, though, and I could tell you many more.
Well, I'm even laughing because I'm imagining Bruce is like, look, honey, I know it's your birthday, but we got an electrical problem over here that I got to take care of. So I will give you your sign later, you know. We got, and the crows were all busy.
Well, and Roland wouldn't know to listen for the crow.
Right.
Well, I was running on the trail one day. He had a company truck. He told me before he died, get rid of that right away. We're making payments on it. The insurance is out of this world. Get rid of it. Well, of course I couldn't, you know, like it sat in the driveway. But after about 4 months, I was thinking, well, I am making payments every month and the insurance is really high. So maybe I need to think about it. So I was running where I do my best thinking. And I just was mulling it over. I don't know. Should I do this? Should I not? And I was almost at the end of my run and I'm like, babe, what should I do? The crow flew right. I'm not kidding you.
I don't ever see crows. Do you?
It flew right over my head, landed on a limb right beside where I was running. It stopped me. I stopped and I said, babe, it sat there. Yeah. I mean, and now granted, it was eating something.
Saw the truck.
Yeah, it didn't even make a noise. It just sat there. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So did you sell the truck?
I did.
Yeah.
I sold the truck. And I will tell you, one of the books that was really helpful for me was just a daily reader. And it was really great for me. Just had a little quote and then a little writing and then a bottom quote. One of them was about the woman who did the book. She had a teenage daughter die in a boating accident or something. And you didn't really know it. It wasn't about her story, but every once in a while it got brought up. And she was talking about the day she thought she had a sign. And she was sitting at the table talking about it with her. She had another son or 2 children and talking about, oh, is this a sign? You know, what it mean? And her son said, Mom, why don't you just accept it as a gift?
Yes.
And I decided that day, that's what I'm doing. And I've been open to whatever comes along and as a gift.
Why wouldn't you believe
Well,
it?
I think for me, just to be devil's advocate,
No, Keira.
it's a fear of disappointment. It's a fear of disappointment and feeling like maybe they're not like looking over you and maybe they're not really connected anymore. And you know, since I met Whitney, I have been trying to be more open for the signs, but I've actually gone through a really hard week with 2 of my children. And I was praying to Frank and he's just like not around.
Radio silence.
Or that's how it feels.
Right. Well, you know, and For me, it's wonderful, but if, everybody's different. I just can't say that enough. What works for me won't work for somebody else. It's, I do believe in God, and I don't not like somebody sitting up there on a cloud, but in everything, the creator, the creation, in the trees, in the pebbles that I walk on. And if Bruce is with God, then Bruce is everywhere, in my opinion. And so why not in a crow?
God's a creator. He's
the creator.
So if you're creative, he can come to you in the most, and I have to say, Whitney got me to really thinking about signs. I'd always look for them, but they weren't so obvious. And then a guy cut me off yesterday, second time, NGB on the license plate. And I thought, how hilarious is this? Because I was really irritated. And that kind of calmed me down immediately, because I thought, he knows life's been hard lately. I do think they're there, but I think it's also, for me, it's a God thing too. And I have to remember, he's creative. He's a creator, by the way.
All right, we're going to put it out here, Frank. Throw her a bone. Throw her a bone.
Oh, she's going to find a bone.
It's probably going to be a bone now. Yeah.
But be open to it.
Well, that said, I think we're probably getting time to where we have to.
Hey, I say one last thing.
I have one more thing to ask you. But
okay. I really think this is an important thing to say for everyone out there too, especially people that are new to this. A tool is breathing. Breathing. People in grief stop breathing.
So true.
They do not breathe, and it is imperative. You're talking about the central nervous system. It helps get back there, the deep breathing from the diaphragm, and it has to be intentional. I mean, have to be intentional and think about it. It's a tool. It's a
Ventilated for about 5 years. Lacey knows when she met me.
I wanted to end on a really kind of fun note, because I was lucky enough and I felt privileged that you invited me to your vow renewal. And it was, I saw a different side to you. I saw you with Bruce, because you were your most, I hate the word authentic. It sounds like the buzzword of the century, but it's true. And I'm sorry I'm making you cry, but people should know who he is.
It just became imperative on him. In fact, he was the one that brought it up. It was in January of that year. He brought it up. He said, I want us to do that now. I want us to do it now. And so we had it the 1st of April, and then he died the next April. And it was amazing. It was
It had to have been fun to do that, because at a funeral, it's a different kind of gathering, obviously, for your friends. But you got to do this with your friends and family and get to do something that was happy at a time that was really hard, I'm sure. So I just thought it was such a magical day. I came away there with some of the coolest, and I didn't know anybody there, not a soul, and everybody made me feel welcome.
This has been so amazing, and we appreciate it so much, so much.
Talk to you all day.
Wisdom, I know, and it's so helpful for us and for all of our listeners. So thank you for being here. It's not easy to talk about these things.
Thank you for having me. Honestly, I feel very honored but humbled, because I learned from you too. I want you to know that. We're walking this path together. I don't care if it's been 13 years or 13 days, right? We're walking it. So thank you all. I appreciate
Not running it, Cheryl. Just walking.
We're just walking. You're running.